I want to warmly welcome everyone this afternoon. We're going to focus on student advocacy initiatives that have taken place across the country. Alors, bonjour à tous et à tous. But I want to start by acknowledging that my cozy basement office is in Toronto on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Many people who are Indigenous from across Turtle Island work and live here in Toronto. And I want to honor the Indigenous people who have lived and worked on this land historically and those who do so in the present. And I know you'll join me in that same welcome and thanks from your own part of the country. Just as Sharon said, we're going to record the presentation portion of today's event. If you have any questions, you could send them to Sharon in the chat, Sharon Webb. But I want to tell you a little bit about today. So student advocacy initiatives that take up the cases of scholars whose work is threatened are an increasingly important of the work that's being done by scholars at risk. Student advocacy seminars mobilize students to conduct research and advocate on behalf of imprisoned scholars and countries where attacks on higher education are prevalent. And that's all part of the work of the Scholars at Risk Network to identify and document and take action in response to threats and attacks. So this afternoon, we're going to hear about some of the different initiatives that are underway at Canadian universities. And our plan is that you will hear from each of our speakers, and then we're going to open the virtual floor for questions and answers, where we hope we can get into sort of the nuts and bolts about what these seminars look like, how they work, and the kinds of things people like me are thinking about when we're imagining what one of these seminars might look like in our own university. So first, let me briefly introduce each of our speakers. So our first duo is Nandini I got it wrong, Ramanujam and Vijay Nayaka. Nandini is a professor and co-director of the Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism. She's in the Faculty of Law at McGill, and she's a member of the steering committee of the SAR Canada section. And Vishaka is a DCL candidate at the Faculty of Law at McGill University and the Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism. She also co-supervises the center's Academic Freedom Advocacy Clinic. Our second speaker today is Salvador Herencia, and he is the director of the Human Rights Clinic of the Human Rights Research and Education Center at the University of Ottawa and a part-time professor in the Section de Droit Civil. Our third speaker will be Mirja, who's a professor of law at l'Université du Québec à Montréal, where she's director of the International Clinic for the Defense of Human Rights. She's also a member of the SAR Canada National Steering Committee, and Mirja is the organizer of today's event. So on behalf of us all, I want to thank her for her hard work in bringing us all together this afternoon. And our last presenter will be Jenny Peterson, who's an associate professor of teaching in the Department of Political Science at the University of British Columbia, where she focuses broadly on peace-building policies. And to date, Jenny has taught 2 formal SAR student advocacy seminars, and she's been awarded funding by UBC to develop a program that would embed SAR-related research opportunities for students across the Faculty of Arts. Now, once our speakers have had a chance to present, we're going to open the floor to more questions. And I want to alert you that lurking in our midst are 2 experts who are going to be available to us during the Q&A. The first is Adam Braver, who's Scholar at Risk's Student Advocacy Seminars Coordinator and the Steering Committee Chair of the US section of Scholars at Risk. And last but not least, Jessie Levine, who is the Senior Advocacy Officer at Scholars at Risk and manages the work of SAR's Academic Freedom Advocacy Team Initiative, which includes the development of research and advocacy projects that focus on discrete academic freedom concerns. So as you can see, we have a stacked deck this afternoon. We have a lot of people with us who have great experience and expertise. So I want to start by turning things over to Nandini and Vishaka.
Thank you, Jo, for such a warm and kind welcome. Thank you, Mirja, for pulling this together. And thank you, everyone, for being here with us. I will share the time allocated to us with Vishaka, and I'll start by telling you briefly about why we do the clinic and some nuts and bolts of how we have set it up. So this is a clinic we have established in partnership with SAR New York, and Jesse has been a co-architect, if not the architect, for the first iteration of this clinic. So thanks to Jesse, and I'm really pleased that he's with us today. And the clinic was established in winter term 2020. McGill became a SAR member in 2011. And we've been hosting scholars since 2012 onwards. And our scholars have engaged with teaching and learning space at the faculty by either directly teaching a full course or giving guest lectures and courses. And there is a conscious raising effort which SAR scholars in our community have taken. And students are well aware of SAR initiative at the faculty. And Justin, who's with us, is as we know, is a part of the SAR team of Canada. The impetus for the clinic, why we set it up and why did we think that it's a good time and we should undertake this is manifold. So first of all, faculty does have a reputation for teaching and research in international human rights law. From the time of Humphrey to Kotler and many others among us are leaders in human rights teaching and research. There is a history of engagement with human rights advocacy at the faculty. And we continue to do that. I have arrived in the faculty in 2006, but I do know that since the 1970s, faculty has engaged in human rights advocacy work. There is a rich and diversifying offering of experiential learning opportunities for students now at the faculty. So the idea was to capitalize on this experiential learning vehicle, which faculty offers now to our students. And most importantly, and I think that will speak to itself in our work, is the Transsystemic Bilingual program, which prepares students to work in civil common law or jurisdictions, understand the workings of mixed jurisdictions, and of course, with the integration of indigenous legal traditions now in our program, this lends strength to the transsystemic education. So our students are really well set to engage with legal traditions and legal systems in different parts of the world. So what are we doing? And after this, I'll hand over to Vishaka. So I started a conversation with Jesse to understand what other clinics do across SAR network. And there are clinics in Europe and there are clinics in North America. So I wanted to understand what do they do. And I also wanted to understand what role these clinics play in SAR's larger advocacy work. How does what small clinics like ours do feeds into the larger efforts of SAR on behalf of SAR network. And then in consultation with Jesse, we identified 3 countries for our first clinic. And these were 3 countries which was identified as there are hotbeds or hotspots for monitoring academic freedom. And it'll feed into a Free to Think report of SAR in 2020. So we picked Russia, Hungary, and Poland for our first clinic. What we needed was, it was very simple for me to set up a clinic in our setting. It required a clear concept note, which got approval from the Student Affairs Office to set up an ad hoc 3-credit clinic for students. Clinical offerings are available only to 3rd year law students, 3rd and upper year. But I sought an exemption for the first clinic and for the second for students who are in their 2nd year with very strong interest and profile in international human rights law. And then we called put a call for applications, and 2 students applied, one being a native Polish speaker, which was a lottery for us, looking at Poland. And Vishaka is a very good example for those who are looking at clinical setting. Doctoral students are tremendous assets for these clinics. And Vishaka has not only expertise in international human rights and humanitarian law, she has worked with the international ICRC in Sri Lanka. She has hands-on experience with human rights advocacy, particularly monitoring and reporting side of things. So having her on board as a co-supervisor was really a tremendous benefit for the clinic. And Jesse met with us at the beginning to share good practices of monitoring and reporting in human rights with us, which set us off to a good start for the first clinic. And then we worked and we consulted Jesse and handed in the report after the term was over. And the report is, Jesse will speak to what happened to our report, and Vishaka will now speak to you the lessons learned and the insights gained as we move forward to the second iteration of our clinic. So over to Vishaka.
Thank you, Professor Ramanujam. I will speak on the tangible outcomes and learning we have gained from the advocacy clinic so far. We can say that it was a very rich learning experience for all. There was the flexible nature of the clinic allowed a space for both supervised and self-directed research. And it was a wonderful example of collaborative learning. In addition to submitting a report to the Scholars at Risk Network, Professor Ramanujam and I wrote an op-ed for the Review of Democracy on academic freedom in Hungary, Poland, and Russia. And Professor Ramanujam was invited to do a follow-up podcast on the same topic. We also have submitted a full-length scholarly article for the RevDem journal. And in winter 2021, there was the second iteration. We had 5 excellent students who have just finished a detailed and insightful report on monitoring academic freedom in Cameroon, Nigeria, India, and Russia. Our work with the clinic has pushed us to get a multidimensional understanding of academic freedom through plural and global perspectives. And as a result, we are hosting a conference on June 9th and 10th on academic freedom, which brings together scholars and advocates from Ghana, China, India, Brazil, Europe, and North America, who will provide critical perspectives on both individual and institutional dimensions of academic freedom. So thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, both Nandini and Vishaka. That's a really nice way for us to start off. So let me move now to Salvador. And Salvador, can you tell us a little bit about your experience at the University of Ottawa?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Salvador, and it is a great pleasure to be here with you. And it's great to see so many familiar faces, Jesse's face included. And we've been working within the Human Rights Clinic. We have been working in association with Scholars at Risk since 2018. And I think that it has been personally the most rewarding project that we have within the clinic. And it is rewarding for 3 simple reasons. One, 95% of our students within this project, which are 10 to 12 students so far that we've had in 3 years, have been from social sciences. So this means the combination of the law or the legal part or the international human rights law part with a multidisciplinary perspective, students from conflict studies, sociology, criminology, it has really enriched the work that we do, right? So that is a rewarding experience for our universities that foster or try to foster multiculturalism values. We at the clinic, and especially in this project, has been very important. Secondly, that our project with SAR has combined advocacy and monitoring efforts. And for us, that has been only identifying potential risks, our geographical landscape are 7 countries in the Americas, which are Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Haiti, Honduras, Mexico, and Venezuela. But also the challenge, and I think with some of you, we've spoken about this, and the last time that we met in Vancouver when traveling was allowed, about, you know, that this is not just identifying risks. We see a risk. What can we do about it? So this combination of identification of cases, we're not just gonna sit on the sidelines, we're actually gonna try to do something about this, has been very important. And we have worked in I think 3 or 4 cases to this date. And from a teaching perspective, Joanna, it has been very interesting to see our students, who are mostly undergrads, saying, my research is going to be read by the president of a Supreme Court? I mean, I'm a 20-something from middle of nowhere, whatever, choose your favorite province. Yes, your actually research will make it to a legal briefing to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And to see that spark of pride in our students is what matters the most. You know, to see that their work is you're not only an RA, but your work is actually a directed research that is used for a purpose. What is that purpose? A professor that was fired because she had the crime of being a feminist and wanted to teach gender violence in university. What was the crime? That you were a judge in Chile and you wanted to do your PhD, your master's thesis on the role of the judiciary in Chile with the Pinochet regime. That was your crime. So for our students to actually be involved in these cases, regardless of the outcome, we cannot control what judges will decide. But for us to actually put that small step towards the issue of academic freedom with our students, it's something that has been very rewarding. And the third thing, and I know that Jess is going to fight with me on this, as a disclaimer, is to actually, in the Americas, we're having the chance to actually bring to light a right that is not really known. Academic freedom is seen or understood as different perspective regardless of where you are. So we are starting a project, an ambitious project, that we're actually being able to actually see there is a case. Academic freedom is important, and it's not a niche right for a specific professor. It involves students, academic staff, it involves diversity, it involves gender violence, etc. and etc. So it is a complex right, and we're trying to actually to see how we are trying to push or to make visible a right that was very hidden in the mainstream or in the human rights lingo, and to actually put it at the forefront is for us actually and my boss Viviana is also here with me. She will not let me lie. Not to actually help make this an important right that has important implications on rule of law, on democracy and human rights. That's, I think, that the third motivation for us to work as a team and in association with different organizations. I'm not the one to assess the impact of our work, right? Because I would be very biased. But I would like to have Joanna, if I may, the last 4 minutes of my time to actually present what is coming. What is the road ahead in the next month, a year or so, and an invitation for you, all of you, to join us. The Inter-American Commission of Human Rights is a regional body of the Organization of American States with jurisdiction in all OAS countries, which goes from Canada to the southern Tierra del Fuego. And we are right now between SAR, our clinic of the Human Rights Research and Education Center, and Aula Abierta, which is a conglomerate of Venezuelan NGOs, we are actually working to support the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in the implementation of an agenda regarding the protection of academic freedom in the Americas. And this is an ambitious project in which we're actually going to work, or we're going to hopefully being able to convince the Commission to adopt a series of principles, cases that highlight academic freedom. So, and thinking from a Canadian student perspective, now our students are not just going to work to support in a specific case. Their research can actually contribute to create a regional human rights policy in the protection of human rights. And I think that in the road ahead, the challenge is not only what are the main principles or ideas or the elements of a right to academic freedom, but how do we make them real? How do we implement these elements? And this is a challenge that we are currently facing, because whether it's the use of certain terms in academia or academic spaces, or because you publicly criticize the government, a government, for the lack of coherent COVID-19 strategy or policy, these are all issues at the heart of academic freedom. And what is our contribution, the contribution of academic? All of us are academics in one way or another. What is our contribution for democracy and rule of law? So I would like to just leave it at this right now at this point, and thank you very much once again for having me.
Thank you, Salvador. You've given us a really nice insight into what the program looks like and some of the sort of heart of what it is that you're doing. Let me turn things over to Mirja.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Joanna. And I would just like to thank Justin Jalea and Sharon Webb also for helping to organize this. So, I'm one of two representatives of UQAM for SAR Canada. And UQAM has been a member of SAR Canada since 2017. And actually, I first heard about the SAR student initiatives at the 2018 SAR Congress in Berlin. And those initiatives seem to mostly take place within specific seminars, which sounds like a great option, but wasn't an option for me because I run a clinical program already. So adding another course to that, another experiential course, wasn't an option for me. But then I had a longer conversation with Melanie Adrian last year, hi Melanie, about this, the Scholars in Prison project of SAR. And Melanie put me in contact with Adam Braver, who was also on the call. And Adam is the one who convinced me in the end that the SAR Scholars in Prison project can actually easily be adapted to all sorts of course formats and all sorts of teaching subjects. Adam is a professor in creative writing. I'm a professor in law, and yet we both managed to incorporate SAR Scholars in Prison project into our teaching. So what is the project exactly? And first and foremost, it's an advocacy opportunity to, to act on behalf of scholars or students who are wrongfully imprisoned in connection with their academic work. But, and I think that is just as important, it's a meaningful learning opportunity for students, which allows them to acquire all sorts of knowledge and tools, and I'll get more into that. The way we set it up at UQAM, actually within the International Human Rights Clinic, is that during the fall 2020 semester, SAR became the partner organization for one group of students, 3 students, whom I supervised, while other student teams worked on other projects with other partners. So the clinic's activities during that semester did not evolve entirely around SAR. This was one of several human rights defense projects we undertook that semester. the students didn't actually have specific, now that the students working on the Scholars in Prison project did not have specific tasks. It was not a predefined mission, so to say. The goal was really to find what action would be useful to advance the cause of those imprisoned scholars and, potentially, eventually help free that person from prison. So it's important to know that many of the scholars that SAR advocates for have been imprisoned for quite a while now. And the interest to take up these cases is really to keep them in the spotlight, to make sure that international pressure doesn't die down, that, to keep the awareness up. And then there's some other cases that are more recent. And the goal in those cases is really to build that momentum, to, make people, make institutions, make governments pay attention to their situation. For the Human Rights Clinic, I had pre-selected a case for the team that seemed to be a good fit in terms of the students' backgrounds and skills. The clinic is specialized in international human rights law, so I made sure to pick a case that offered some opportunities for international human rights advocacy, or at least that's what I thought I did. Let's put it that way. The scholar on behalf of whom we advocated is Patrick George Zaki. He's a 28-year-old Egyptian citizen. At the time of his arrest, he completed a master's degree in gender studies at the University of Bologna in Italy. And Mr. Zaki is also a human rights defender and a human rights researcher for the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights, EIPR, which is an NGO that focuses on women's rights, rights of minorities, and the rights of other vulnerable groups such as Christians and the LGBTQ+ community in Egypt. So Mr. Zaki was arrested in connection with his work as a human rights defender and as a researcher. And this happened at the Cairo International Airport on February 7th, 2020, after he flew to Egypt to visit his family. Now, many of these details about the case, the students actually had to do, a certain amount of research to know about these details of the case. This was part of the project work, gathering all sorts of information, doing research on the socio-political situation in Egypt, finding out about past advocacy initiatives in the Zaki case, etc. So all this had to be done in order to analyze, what kind of actions would be beneficial for this case at this point in time. So they were very much immersed in a sort of ongoing advocacy effort. There were other stakeholders as well. The fellow students of Mr. Zaki in Italy had started a campaign. EIPRC also has had an ongoing or their own efforts underway. So it was really important that the students identify, what contribution can they make in order to complement, to strengthen these efforts. And honestly, the options are pretty much unlimited and depend very much on what your background is. So like I mentioned, for the team, initially, we thought that what we were bringing to the table was a legal expertise in international human rights advocacy. But shortly after starting the project, we realized that actually all of the United Nations special procedures that we sort of had our eyes on had already been alerted and had very recently taken action in favor of Patrick Zaki, which is a good thing. But it meant that we had to shift our focus, and we decided eventually to address political actors and the media. And I can talk about some of those results later on if you like. Let me turn to what the experience was like. So I worked very closely with the team. I think I have a very good sense of the abilities they developed, some of which, include writing and linguistic skills, but mostly I think they learned how to work on this type of cause, how to frame the issues, how to bring your message across, who to address, how to address them, all those things. We were also lucky to meet with Adam on Zoom, who has been tremendously helpful. He was able to draw from past projects, show us examples, come up with ideas for advocacy. And of course, there's a student advocacy handbook that produced by SAR that is also very helpful. As for the students' personal experience, from what they told me, I think the sense of urgency of the case made a really big difference for them. You know, it was like this, it is an ongoing violation of a person's fundamental rights. And at some point, there was actually a chance that Patrick Zaki might be released while we were working on the project. And the students were on social media all day, every day, checking out, you know, what is happening. And unfortunately, while other members of EIPR were released, Patrick Zaki was not. And yeah, the last point, I guess, is I want to you know, touch upon academic freedom as well, and sort of confirm what Salvador and Mirja have already said. The importance of, you know, of academic freedom in general, and having a partner organization that defends that freedom, I think really had made an impact on all of the students of the clinic that semester. All of them were able to relate to that student. They're students themselves. So, you know, they were able to relate from the student from Bologna. He does research on topics that are very similar to what they work on in university, except that he's in prison for it. So I think that really touched a nerve with them. So yeah, I think I'll stop right there. I believe Jenny will also talk about the Scholars in Prison project, so you'll get lots more information, and of course I'll be available for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mirja. Like the other two speakers, you've opened up another sort of realm of possibility for us about what student advocacy seminars could look like. Because I hope, as everyone's starting to see, they don't look the same in every place. The elements are the same, but there are lots of ways of doing things. Let me turn things over to Jenny, who's just sharing her screen with us. Jenny?
There we go. Yes, so thanks. So I'll be talking about the SAR student advocacy seminars as well, but I'm going to save a little time at the end to talk about some of the other initiatives that we have happening at UBC as well. So yeah, as was mentioned, all the seminars, or all the ways that we engage with SAR, there's no one model, and I've learned that from talking to so many other people who work on these. And so I'll just be presenting how I run my seminar, and hopefully folks will resonate or think about how that could work in their own setting. Like the others, I just want to reiterate how rewarding of an experience this has been for both me and my students for all the reasons already noted. I got involved largely because I was on the UBC SAR advisory committee that focused on the protection element of SAR's work, and the idea of UBC also contributing to the other two missions, which is learning and advocacy, really spoke to me as an educator. Also, I'm sure this is an issue on lots of other campuses, but the topic of academic freedom on my own campus had become kind of a flashpoint in some senses. The debates had largely been around controversial speakers, quote unquote. And I felt that there was a need for our undergraduate students to really have a much deeper understanding of what academic freedom was, why it was important, why we have it, what responsibilities come with it. So that was also one of my motivations. And I do feel like the students who participated really leave the course more able to have these conversations about what academic freedom is and its limitations, which I think is really important in this day and age, given all the tensions we're starting to see on campus. So I just wanted to add that there was also a little bit of personal motivation for wanting to expand this program here at UBC. I personally run the seminar as a 400 level seminar, so a fourth year research seminar, which is about 20 students. Very at my university, or in my department, we have these really broad course titles, issues in international relations. So I was able to just kind of adapt an already existing course and make it more in line with the SAR advocacy seminars. The formal title is noted there. I personally run my course as a mix of a traditional academic seminar with discussions and academic readings and the experiential. So I do both, but I know that other folks run it purely as an experiential kind of course. I've chosen to run it as both. My course is 13 weeks, which is a limitation I'll talk about near the end. And also I want to give a huge shout out to all of the guest speakers that Scholars at Risk provides. I am not an expert in academic freedom. I'm not even an expert in human rights. And so it's been really helpful. I just wanted to also let folks know who are considering it that you're not kind of just left alone. SAR has been wonderful in providing guest speakers who are experts in the field. My students have had the opportunity to talk to family members of imprisoned scholars. And so there's just a wealth of supports provided by SAR, and I just wanted to note that as well. As I mentioned, I do a mix of kind of purely academic readings as well as kind of more experiential training. I won't go through all of the topics I cover, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a sense of the nuts and bolts of my course and the different types of things that students are exposed to over the course of the semester. A little bit about how I organized my course. So I was really interested to hear Mirja's experience of focusing on the one scholar, Patrick Zaki. We also focused on him. I chose 5 cases for my 20 students to work on. So there was 4 students per scholar. And again, I chose those scholars for a range of different reasons. For example, I chose the case of Nilüfer Bayani. She's a conservationist. Actually studied at McGill. She's a conservationist who has been imprisoned in Iran, and UBC has a very strong advocacy network around conservation and student climate justice organizations. So I chose that case. And so all of the cases were kind of chosen with thinking about the campus community in mind and where we might be able to leverage the networks we have here at UBC. One of the decisions I made in the second running of my course was I created dedicated roles within each team. So there was 5 teams and every student in each team had a dedicated role. And I really found, I didn't do this the first time, I learned as I went, and I did this in the second round. And I felt that this really helped students be able to focus, because as Mirja noted, it becomes a big part of their life. She was talking about how students were on social media all day trying to find updates on Patrick Zaki's case. And I found that with my students that it was starting to be really overwhelming for them. And so finding ways to create kind of concrete things for each of them to be doing kind of made what seemed a very overwhelming task a little bit more manageable, because they felt they had these more concrete roles to deliver in terms of the project. So that was just a choice that I made that I found particularly helpful this past year. I'll just talk a little bit about how I assessed this, because a lot of folks might be thinking, how do you grade this? This isn't a normal essay. So I did have a couple traditional academic assignments because it was a research seminar. Students did have to fulfill certain criteria for a 400 level seminar. So I did have some kind of basic academic, what we might call traditional academic assignments. But the deliverables for SAR were undoubtedly the assignments that students put more energy into. I have to say the infographics and essays were good, but I find students do tend to put more energy into the deliverables for SAR. Students produced a monthly report for SAR, and this went through to Adam Braver and his wonderful team of students. And this just helped keep the students on track. It allowed them to ask questions to SAR, ask for certain types of support from SAR, again, thinking about how wonderful SAR is in supporting these. They also produced an advocacy report where they had to justify why they chose a certain type of advocacy, how it went, and then they also had to evaluate that advocacy as well. So again, building in these kind of training skills of monitoring and evaluation. And then they also produced a full human rights monitoring report, which included media monitoring, looking at legal analysis, looking at what had been done in global civil society, local civil society, etc. So those were the deliverables, and that's how I graded students along the way. Just a quick note about some of the advocacy outcomes. Okay, we'll go back. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat there. So the students did a lot on social media. This was the first year students asked me, could we do TikTok, which was a new social media platform for me, I'm more of a Twitter person. So I talked to SAR about it and we kind of weighed the pros and cons. And so my students did create a dedicated TikTok account where they produced videos on different, on some of the different cases. I couldn't quite figure out how to embed a TikTok video into my PowerPoint slide. But this particular TikTok video was related to the case of Nilfor Bayani, the conservationist I mentioned. It actually got close to 20,000 views. And they had some pretty good engagement. You probably won't be able to see the clip here. Someone commented about how, you know, they'll sign the petition, but they don't think petitions do any good. And the students were then able to consult the literature, the academic literature on petitions, on the value of petitions, and then they created a subsequent TikTok video that talked about why petitions are important. So there was this really nice kind of iterative process going on where students were drawing on their research skills and their expertise to inform folks. There was also solidarity events for Gian Sai Baba with the goal of driving people to SAR's action letter. So they hosted several events for this particular scholar, and they would then drive folks to the SAR action letter for the scholar. They also engaged in letter writing campaigns. Some groups decided to do letter writing campaigns, both to governments, but also to UBC admin, encouraging UBC admin to be an institutional signatory to particular cases. I know sometimes institutions will sign some of SAR's action letters, so students engaged in that, and of course, some online petitions, both change.org petitions, but also petitions to the Canadian government. And I know Melanie's here as well. A few years ago, our students worked together on the case of Dr. Hatoun Alfassi, and the students were successful in getting the Canadian government to formally reply to the case of Dr. Hatoun Alfassi. It was tabled in Parliament. And so my students this semester have been working on doing the same for Professor Ilham Tohti, Uyghur scholar, who has been imprisoned, disappeared in China. Unfortunately, COVID-19, just a brief note about things that didn't go super smoothly this year. The impact of COVID-19, everything being online, we sometimes think online activism is really effective, but students were unable to do tabling events in the nest. They were unable to engage in the normal types of advocacy face-to-face that would be effective. And so we are struggling a little bit to get the signatures for the Tohti case. So if it's allowed later in the chat, I will pop a link to the petition. If there's any student activists in the group today that are willing to help and support, or any faculty who are willing to help spread the word about this petition, I know my students would really appreciate it. Just really quickly, some concerns and limitations. Maybe that won't work. There we go. Student safety and wellness is really important. Mirja mentioned about how students were constantly online. I did have one of my cases was an issue. Dr. Amdreja Dejali in Iran has received a death sentence, has been in solitary confinement, and they've been threatening to carry out his death sentence. And so there was a real concern about student wellness in that case, and also student safety. This is one of the reasons why I have multiple cases. For some students, for their own safety, they might not feel comfortable working on certain cases. So that's another reason I use multiple cases in my class. 13 weeks is not enough, just as 10 minutes is not enough to go over everything here. So if you do have the opportunity to run it as a year-long course, I do think that's preferable. As I mentioned, student roles. I just want to kind of reiterate to everyone in the room, in the Zoom room, that I am not an expert in human rights. I have never run a legal clinic. I am not an expert in academic freedom, but I felt this was important. And I will never be ready to be an expert in any of these things. And so I would encourage anyone who's on the fence thinking, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to do this, to do it. The students will carry you, learn alongside them. Of course, one concern we have about these programs is they're linked to me. I'm the only professor teaching one. And that's a sustainable way to run a proper program. So as Joanna mentioned, I have received funding from UBC to expand and embed SAR's work across the Faculty of Arts. And so for faculty who, they don't want to teach a new course, or, their departments might not allow them to teach a SAR student seminar, they already have their course requirements. My colleagues across the Faculty of Arts have found so many creative ways to include SAR's work within their courses. And I've just noted a few there. So whilst, we've all been talking about these big programs that might seem overwhelming, it's also possible to integrate SAR's work into already existing courses in really meaningful ways as well. And I'll also include a link in the chat later about our website that offers professors ideas about different ways to integrate SAR's work into already existing courses if you're not feeling ready to do a full seminar. And that's everything for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jenny. While Jenny is not is finishing sharing her screen, Jenny, can I get you to do that? Let me just say, I hope that you are as enthusiastic and inspired as I am listening to these 4 very different experiences, but very similar in lots of ways. And I think Jenny was the perfect person to go last in the presentations, because she offered to all of us the gulp kind of solutions. What if it's just me? What if I don't have this? What if I'm not enough? Jenny, your presentation was really great for that. So thanks very much. My job now is to open the floor to questions and answers. And the way I'm going to ask you to do this, I know it's only 14 months into the pandemic, so this Zoom thing might be new to you, but in the Zoom things, you can raise your hand. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you have a question, and that will help me to keep a speakers list. But just before we do that, and they aren't expecting me to do this, but Adam and Jesse, I'm going to turn to each of you just quickly to see if there's anything you'd like to add onto the presentations. I'm going to go in alphabetical order by last name. Adam, it puts you on the spot. Jesse, it gives you time to think a little bit. But Adam, is there anything else that you'd like to add as people are forming questions for the group?
Well, I knew I was going to lose when you said alphabetical either way. No, I mean, I think that particularly on the seminars, it was pretty well covered. I think the only thing that I might add into the conversation is the idea that there are seminars happening around the world as well, not just in Canada, in the US, throughout Europe, and that it is another objective of ours to create interaction as much as possible, so that these are international conversations that are happening, and at times, when possible, even international planning and advocacy activities taking place. So.
Thanks so much, Adam. Jesse, over to you. Any other things you'd like to throw into the mix?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I think you all did a beautiful job of sort of covering the gamut of both clinics and seminars and the types of advocacy we do. I mean, it really is very broad ranging and may include sort of a more public sort of advocacy perspective, and it may also include, as the clinics that I oversee generally do, a more legal sort of doctrine intensive approach. So I think there's kind of something there for everyone. I would only emphasize one point, which is that Scholars at Risk is still a relatively small organization in terms of our staff. I think we just cracked the 20 mark. But our mandate is global and our work is huge. And what that means is that these really are partnerships. So lest anyone doubt the importance of this work, this is about doing something. It is not purely academic. It is, as you all say, experiential to the greatest degree it possibly could be. And students in both clinics and seminars have every right to expect that their work will have an impact and will engage in the real world. So, I think that's a really important point to begin the conversation on.
Thank you, Jesse. She doesn't know that I'm going to do this, but you heard Mirja Trilsch mention Melanie Adrian. Melanie is a former member of the National Steering Committee. Melanie, could you just talk to us a little bit about the University Uncensored initiative?
Yeah, I would be delighted. Thank you so much. My seminar, advocacy seminar, runs along the lines of Jenny's seminar. So I won't rehash kind of what I do, but the element that I added to it a few years ago that has now been on hold because of COVID, but that we're planning again for not spring of 22, but spring of 23. That might be an interesting piece for all of you thinking about this. Is that we are hoping to create and to offer a conference, or we've run it once now, called University Uncensored. It's a summit, an advocacy summit that brings together, initially the Canadian courses, academic advocacy courses, and then hopefully also international courses from that our US colleagues are offering and elsewhere. And the idea there that was very successful in this iteration of it, and Adam will note well, so please, Adam, please speak to this if you wouldn't mind. But it was a 2-day summit that brought all of the students together from the University of Ottawa and Carleton at the time, that allowed them to deepen their practical skills, their presentation skills, their communication skills, thinking strategically, all of those kinds of skills. And hopefully what we will add to it in the coming years is that they will go to Parliament and then they would advocate for their the person and the case that they've been working on, much like what they've been doing for a number of years now in the United States. So that's something that we have done on a small scale. We're building up now, and that anyone who would be interested in bringing their students would absolutely be welcome to do so. Adam, if you want to add anything, go for it.
It was a terrific conference, and for all the reasons that you've mentioned, Melanie. The other thing that I would add into that was the number of guests that you had at the conference from various people in government, talking about how Canadian government works in terms of human rights. Other scholars, SAR scholars, who were there to share their experiences, lest the work being done by the students start to be seen as something abstract or distant. And just some really great keynotes. And also, what sticks out in my memory in particular, and the reason I'm saying it's because I was there, was that also bringing other NGO partners to hear how that were in the Ottawa area, just to understand how they approach issues in terms of particularly in the Canadian context, in ways that they have found success in advocating they were from issues from hunger to disabilities and so on. So I thought it was a really rich experience. It was 2 days that felt like 2 weeks in the good way. So
Not like Zoom calls that feel like 2 weeks when they're
exactly.
only 1 hour. Okay,
Exactly.
Thank you both, Melanie and Adam, for that. Let me